And welcome back. I'm Barbara Tangs and your PW training leader here. So let's start to look at what goes on during early voting because there are some very significant differences between election day voting and early voting. So let me share my screen. So again, we're going to talk about early voting here in the county. So early voting, the whole election period, we refer to it as the election season because we have one of, if not the longest voting seasons every year in the country. We have 45 days of early voting. I know this slide looks pretty busy, but let me break it down for you so that it's easier to digest. We have three 45-day voting, what are called satellites. Voting is going to start this season on September 20 and run through November 2. That's the Saturday before election days. And voting will be held in these three sites at the Fairfax County Government Center, North County, and Mount Vernon Government Centers. The times are the same. North County and Mount Vernon are open every day or Monday through Friday rather, from 1 to 7. Fairfax County is open different hours, and that's because it's open during the hours that the building is open. It's a much larger building. It has many more offices in it. So voting occurs from 8 to 4:30. There are 4 Saturdays that the voting will occur. So there's going to be voting on Saturdays on September 21. So it'll be the day after voting starts. Then again on October 19 and 26. And then there's also a Sunday, October 27th. And then the last Saturday is November 2. All of the sites are all of the hours for the sites. Saturdays, again, for all sites, regardless of where, is 9 to 5. And the Sunday times is 1 to 5. Now, as of October 17th, they will open 13 additional sites. These are the same sites as last year. So if you worked with us last year, you'll know what they are. They did rename one site. Providence has now been renamed to the Jim Scott Community Center. But all of these sites will open on October 17th, which is 6 days earlier. Last year, this was these were 10-day sites. They're now 16-day sites. And I think this is just in response to the Office of Elections anticipating that because it's a presidential year, that there may be longer lines and people wanting to vote early. So they've decided to open these sites 6 days earlier than in the past. On election day, we have, is regular election day. The polls will open at 6 a.m. They'll close at 7 p.m. And we have 265 precincts in the county. So we're going to ask you to work when the election officers work. So on election day, we need you to show up at 5 a.m. And these are the opening times. So we'll get to the opening times for each of the sites later on, but a little bit earlier than when they open for the voting public. We want you to be in there to be able to observe the setup and the start. So we're going to ask you to on 9/20 on all 3 locations, and again on 10/16. 10/17 at the 13 additional locations. Arrive on opening day 1 hour ahead of the satellites. The other days you can arrive a half an hour early, but we need you to observe the setup and what's going on. We want you to be sure to observe that the public number is 0. Now this is the same as election day, but there are going to be 2 opening days during early voting, again, 9/20 and 10/17. So we want you to be able to observe that the opening public number is 0 on each of the DS200s. Also, we want you to record that the poll pad numbers all start at 0 on opening day. You want to just take a peek and make sure that the drop box is empty at the start of each voting day. There should be a lock on the back of it. And then just observe that voting starts on time at each location, whether it's 8 in the morning at Fairfax or whether it's 1 in the afternoon. Now you're going to be emailed the initial numbers. So whoever has the opening shift at all of these sites on an opening day will get an automatic email message of the information on the DS200 machines. So that's going to include the top lid zip tie number, the red tape seal number, and the protected and the public counts prior to opening. We need you to record these numbers, especially if you notice that something's different. If there's a ballot that's been cast in the DS200s before opening, that can't happen. So if you see anything that suggests that the numbers are different, please talk to the chief right away. Now, the early voting procedures are very different from Election Day, and I mentioned these a little bit back in the one of the earlier modules, but there's no tabulating during early voting. So every night the DS200s are hibernated. In other words, if 100 votes are put in the machine on opening day, when the machine opens up the next morning on the Saturday morning, then the machine should still say 100 votes. They don't tally. They don't want to let out the information of who's ahead. So we have no idea, we know that 100 votes were cast, but we have no idea for whom. So we don't want anyone to know who's ahead or behind, or that would skew the results of people coming to vote or not coming to vote. So like I say, the end of day count must equal the next day's opening count on each of the DS200s. Now when we've been talking about reporting, and we'll talk about reporting in one of the next modules, but the closing shift, whenever the closing shift goes in and does his report, that poll watcher, his results are going to be sent via email automatically overnight to whoever signed up to be the opening day or the opening shift poll watcher for the next day. So that next day poll watcher is going to know exactly what the end count was of the public number, so they'll know to be able to verify that there hasn't been anything funny going on overnight. Just take a look too, they're going to be printing ballot-specific or precinct-specific ballots using the on-demand printers during early voting. This won't happen on Election Day. On Election Day, everybody will go to his precinct. The ballots for that precinct will have been pre-printed, and there's no need for any kind of printing. But during early voting, there are 16 different sites, but you can vote at any location. So each location has to have the capacity to create a ballot that looks exactly like the ballot that voter would have seen on Election Day. So early voting is very different from Election Day voting in that regard. Also, the whole idea of no tabulation, they have to carry over the numbers from one day to the next. And the check-in process is different because there's no ballot table. The voter's going to approach the check-in table, they'll check in, and they'll get their ballot at the same time, and they'll go directly over to the ballot marking area to mark their ballots. During early voting, we've talked about there being thumb drives in each of the scanners, but the scanners only have a certain capacity. They say somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 ballots. Well, we have almost 250,000, or actually more than 250,000 registered voters in the county. So it could be that a DS200 will fill up with images, and that this whole white section that's called a clamshell will need to be replaced. So they'll just unhook this whole top and replace it. If that happens while you're on duty as a poll watcher, we just want you to be aware of what's going on. There's not any funny business. What you'll see is a rover or a Office of Elections technician will come in. They will close this DS200. They will pull down the top. they will replace it with a new clamshell, if you will. So if it's possible, it would be nice for you if you can record what is the closing number, the public and the private count, or public and protected counts of the old machine and the new machine, get the red seal number of the old machine and the new machine, and write down the zip tie numbers. So what are the zip ties that are on the ballot compartment, on the auxiliary, and on the top lid seal? Another significant difference during early voting is absentee ballots. And we've mentioned this before in an earlier module, but it bears saying again, during early voting and only during early voting, if a voter comes in and he shows on the screen on the poll pad as having requested an early or an absentee ballot, and he comes in to vote, he needs to have brought in his absentee ballot. But during early voting and only during early voting, if he says he never got it in the mail, it never came to him, or he lost it, then he can sign what's called a statement of voter form. And it's affectionately called a goldenrod because that's actually the color of the form. He'll be given a goldenrod to sign, which says, I never got it, I swear I never got it, or I've lost it. And he'll be given a ballot and then he'll vote normally. This does not happen on election day. Can't stress that enough. If the same situation were to occur on election day, the voter is forced into voting a provisional ballot. Very different from election day, or from early voting. Come time to close, I mean, so many of the procedures are the same, election day and early voting, but those are the significant differences. Again, on election day in closing during early voting for closing, the chief's going to make the same. The polls will be closing in 15 minutes, and then, at the 7 o'clock hour, they will say, and the polls are now closed. Whoever has the closing shift, prepare to be there a little bit longer, because they're going to be tearing down the entire precinct. So just like election day, they'll have to take the signage down. They'll be taking all of the outside voting signs. They'll have to bring those in and pack them up. It's very similar to the closing of election day. They're still not doing tabulating. So when the chief goes to pack up her or his car, they're going to take the 2 clamshells in their car and take those back. They'll also pack up the ballots. They don't need to do anything about there are no collector officers during early voting. So it'll be the chief that's taking the clamshells back, taking the voted ballots back, taking the provisional ballots back. During interim during early voting, there'll be a rover come around and maybe picking up on a daily or periodic basis, picking up in a triplock bag the drop box ballots that have been collected for each day. They'll be getting the provisional ballots and the SDRs that have been collected for each day. But on the last day, all of that gets bundled up and is collected by the chief and taken back to the Fairfax County Government Center. So as you are there to close out, get the same ending day counts, the DS200 counts, public and protected, the red seal numbers, the poll book counts, the zip tie numbers, and so forth, and the number of absentee ballots that are in the drop box. So when we come back, we'll talk about reporting. We've spoken a good bit about what we want you to collect and where you can find it. Now we'll amplify on that a little bit more.